Anastasia Somoza. Welcome to the Traipsin Global on Wheels podcast hour.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So Anastasia Somoza began her advocacy work in 1993 when at the age of 9 she had the opportunity to ask President Bill Clinton to help mainstream her twin sister Alba into the New York City public school system. Anastasia is now leading the inclusion revolution as a human rights defender, speaker, and consultant. On the first night of the 2016 Democratic National Convention, she gave a moving speech about her relationship with Hillary Clinton and Americans with disabilities. Anastasia's international advocacy has brought her to China, where she worked to eliminate the abandonment of babies and children with disabilities. She also joined the company of Off-Broadway's Addy and Uno, Off-Broadway's first family musical comedy to celebrate disability, friendship, and kindness as the show's consulting producer. So thank you for coming on to the show today, Anastasia.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
So I understand that your disability is cerebral palsy. I think what some of our listeners may be unfamiliar with is spastic quadriplegia. So can you just give a brief summary of what that is?
Yeah, so I have cerebral palsy, and it just means I suffered a lack of oxygen to my brain at birth. And spastic quadriplegia just describes the fact that all four of my limbs, so both of my legs and both of my arms, are affected. And the spastic is just to indicate that my body generally is affected by spasticity. So I deal with stiffness, and when the weather changes, that affects my muscles.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think a lot of people are unfamiliar with it, and the challenges that proposes. What are the unique challenges of having spastic quadriplegia that's different from other kinds of disabilities?
CP in general, I mean, the spasticity itself can be difficult because it means I can only move certain muscles in certain ways, and when I've injured myself growing up, if you know if certain muscles get stiff at the wrong time when I'm trying to transfer myself or do some kind of a movement, and a muscle becomes stiff at the wrong moment, then that can sometimes cause injury or make transferring difficult. But CP in general, the disability itself, I would say I've learned, I've lived my whole life with it. So you learn how to compensate for the aspects of daily life that are a little bit more challenging. Like for me, I guess the most frustrating part of my spasticity is needing assistance to use the bathroom, and with the lack of accessibility in our physical world, sometimes my spastic bladder muscle gets annoying because there isn't always a bathroom when I need it, and if there is a bathroom, it's not always accessible. So that's really the only thing that I can think of on a daily basis that really annoys me.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people don't know that it's good to shed light and to inform people about it. So what, in terms of having a disability and dating with a disability. I have friends with and without disabilities, just like you, and some of my friends with disabilities have talked about how frustrated they've been with the dating scene and people judging them by their disability. So, for you, what is the most challenging part of having a disability in trying to date?
I guess it's reminding. For me, it's just uh, uh it's a really good question. I I have very strong opinions on this topic, and I'm having trouble articulating them. Um, I um, I think that the most challenging things for me in terms of becoming more comfortable with dating is was just having to teach myself, find ways to convince myself that I needed to go into it with confidence. Yeah, I used to be very shy about years ago. My younger sister put me on a dating app because she wanted me to get out there and start meeting people, and I was terrified of being rejected. I was as soon as the guy sees I'm in a wheelchair, there's no way he's going to give me the time of day. And I just was so terrified of it that I just didn't go. I didn't try it. Like, guys would message me, and I was so terrified of it that I didn't even try it because all I could think about were the potential negative feelings. Like, all of the what ifs were negative, and all of the what ifs related to me. Like, I was doing it to myself in my head. I was saying, well, he doesn't what if he does this? What if I show up and he walks out? And what if I show up and he finds out I have cerebral palsy and I tell him one detail about my disability and he freaks out? Like, so I used to do a lot of this building up of negative what ifs in my head. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that I don't that I don't still get nervous when I'm meeting new people, and that I want to mention also that it doesn't only apply to the dating scene. I always have a little bit of nervous energy when I'm meeting new people in general, especially people who don't have a disability or may not have had the same level of exposure. But I think the way that I have learned to deal with it is to stop being the person to create all of those negative what ifs in my head before they happen. So I go into every date saying, if we like each other, we like each other. If we don't, we don't. And I've just stopped making it all about my disability in in my head, and that makes it a lot easier. And that might not be the case for the guy. Like, most guys that I might be meeting, or not most, many of the guys that I may still be meeting, to them my disability may still be a big deal, but I take I take on that worry a lot less. Does that make I just don't think about it as much as I used to.
Yeah,
And
no, that makes total sense.
and it
And I think it's just the process of maturing, of going through the positives and the negatives, and then just learning that even if you do worry about it all, it won't help. And
yeah, and I guess it's easier for me to talk about now. I'll be honest, because I have a wonderful boyfriend right now. I've been through the process that we're talking about very recently, because we haven't been together for too long. So I was still going through the process of getting to know him and dating him this summer. And I one of the reasons why my experience with him was so unique is because he was the first guy in a long time, in many, many years, that I'd started dating off of a dating app, um, that didn't ask any questions about my disability. It was just a very natural. We met up for a meal, and we had a conversation, and he never, to this day, he never, he never has made our getting to know each other all about my disability. And that's probably part of the reason why it's been such a great experience, because I guess I can't really speak for him, but my perception is that he probably on some level realized that, there's no point in asking the questions when you can just experience it. He decided he wanted to live the experience, and that's what he did. Instead of asking, he just did.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of having like a half-hour conversation with me about whether I could kiss, he just decided to kiss me. And in just deciding to kiss me, he figured out that of course I can kiss. So I guess this time I was lucky. I came across a guy that has a particularly high level of emotional intelligence, and I think and that's hard to find, whether or not you have a disability. I talk to my non-disabled friends all the time, and they have the same they tell the same stories. It might not be because of a physical disability in their case, but they tell the same stories. It is a very common experience.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great. I'm so happy to hear that you found someone special. I think you touched on a lot of great points there and very empowering as well, because there are so many, individuals with disabilities out there like us who do struggle with disabilities. Some that are, the very same as yours, and you were talking about the what ifs. As you and I know, some of those what ifs do happen. So my question for you is, how did you deal with when those what ifs did happen, and how did you handle it emotionally and physically at the scene?
With dating specifically, you mean?
Yeah, with dating specifically.
So I'll how did I handle the more negative things? Again, um it seems really simple, but it for me it's just every individual has to decide what they're going to be okay with, and what they're not going to be okay with. So I'll give you, when I was still dating, um, I was supposed to go out to meet this guy at a bar in the East or West Village, I don't remember. And my younger sister happened to be in town, and she was helping me get ready. And she said, Anastasia, have you told have you told him that you're in a wheelchair? And she said, I'm not saying you have to go into this huge detailed explanation of your disability, but does he at least know you're in a wheelchair? And I said, Gabriella, of course he knows. Like, there photographs, and he is one of these guys that did ask some disability related questions before we met. So yes, he has some clarity around it, even though I was not the happiest person to have to give him those details. So that's what I would say. If you're a person with a disability and you're online dating, if you are the type of person that doesn't mind uh, the person who you are potentially going out on a date with asking you a couple of questions about your disability before you meet up. Like, I personally, if a guy wants to ask me those questions, I would allow them to. I would create a space that makes them feel comfortable to ask me those questions. So that's the first thing I do. But sometimes, even when you do that, like with this one guy that I was talking about with my sister before I went to meet him, this was like just a couple of hours before. Like, I was getting ready to meet him on this date, and I picked up my phone and looked at our chat history, and she said, just to make sure, Anastasia, because you're assuming that he's been, observant enough and everything, just to make sure, why don't you ask him, you know, uh, ask some kind of question about the restaurant that would, like, indicate, I don't know, just say something like, "Oh, did you ask him if he called to make sure the entrance of the restaurant is accessible?" Ask him a random question like that, just to make sure that he knows before you show up that you're actually in a wheelchair, and see how he reacts to that. So I did that. I followed my sister's advice, and I remember while I was typing the message to Sky, I was actually laughing because I said, "This is ridiculous. Of course he knows." But he replied back, and he started he I think he replied by saying, "Oh, why? What's wrong with you?" And he literally typed, like, "What's wrong with you?" And when I saw that, there there are two ways you can I could have reacted. I could have I was upset when I saw it, in the sense that it immediately made me want to meet him less. But I decided to turn. I could have gotten upset and curled up into a ball and decided to let it paralyze me. But instead, I just got frustrated in my head, and then cooled off for a few minutes, and decided to use it as an opportunity to not be mean, but just turn it into an empowering moment where I just simply said to him, I turned it back on him, and I said, "Nothing's wrong with me. I just, get around the world on, four wheels. Do you have a problem? If you have a problem with that, let me know. I'm gonna stop doing my hair now or whatever." And I think I was sort of funny about it. And I think I might have said, "Nothing's wrong with me. What's wrong with you?" Like a wheel. So I've gotten comfortable enough in my own skin to not let those things bother me. But honestly, the only way to get that comfortable is to do it. Like, I've had really bad experiences. Like, I showed up on another date. I thought I was meeting a 32-year-old guy who was named Luca, and I showed up to this restaurant, and the guy was 45, and I found out within the first, like, 10 minutes of the date that nothing he had told me on the phone or on the dating app was correct. He basically admitted that he had like falsified his entire dating app because he was so worried about putting his real details on the app because he didn't want any of his professional colleagues to stumble upon him. And that was probably the most uncomfortable date I've ever been on recently, when I rolled into a date and met a completely different person than the one that I expected to meet. And when you're in those uncomfortable situations, you just I probably stayed on that date a little bit longer than I should have. But the only way to get comfortable with it is to just practice doing it. Is to put yourself into those uncomfortable spaces, and then you'll get more comfortable with it by the time.
Yeah. No, I think you've been so candid with some of your, experiences, with some of your experience, which aren't easy. I think you were talking about earlier with how technology has really improved your life. It sounds like in the dating realm as well, with online dating. What other opportunities do you think are out there besides online dating for individuals with disabilities? Is online dating the easiest avenue, or are there other ones that that are accessible to individuals with disabilities as well?
I mean, uh, honestly, I was very resistant to online dating for many years. It and I will be honest, it terrified me because of this very thing that we've been talking about for the last little while. It terrified me because of my disability, because I always said, it, if a person doesn't have the ability to meet me first, how could it not be all about my disability? So, the reason why I gave into it and tried it is just because, again, I think it's an individual decision. I know, because of my personality, I'm not the type of person that goes out to bars all the time. I don't, you know, I'll occasionally meet up with friends after work for, a happy hour, or go to like work fun, but I'm not the type of person that goes out every weekend, whether it be to a club or to a bar or to. So I know that I'm not that great at putting myself out there that way. So I just realized that for me, because I'm less comfortable with like going clubbing and putting myself into social scenarios where I may meet someone and it may translate into going on a date. I just decided to get on the app to expand my social circle, just to meet new people. So I wouldn't say that online dating is the only way to do it. If you are a very social person, you know, I still would say the best way to meet someone is to meet them in person. If you are the type of person that likes to go out and yeah, and put yourself out there like that, then that's the I think that's the other way to go. Some people get set up with friends and things like that, but I think most people, dating apps and online dating are really common now. So I just had to realize that if I really wanted to be dating, I had to come to the personal realization, that if I really wanted to try to meet someone, then I really needed to give the online dating a shot because I do a lot of independent work, and for a while I was working for myself. So, it's not like I work in an office 3 days a week, but for many, many years I never went into an office, so I didn't have a lot of opportunity to meet new people outside of my circle. So I just knew that if I didn't do it the online way, that I might be adding to my struggle. But
Yeah, those are very great advice and very nice specific examples as well. So, moving on to your work, how's being New York City's first ever liaison to the disability community?
it's great. It's great. I work in the community outreach unit, and it's part of a larger division called the Community Engagement Division. And as the community liaison covering accessibility and all other issues that affect disabled New Yorkers, I'm basically um, I work to connect people in my community to what we're doing in government. So it's the position is great because it allows me to do exactly that. I've working on building connections between a lot of the organizations that serve people with disability citywide, to the speaker's office, and um, and so that's what it's really about. It's about um, you know setting up lines of communication between the community so that the city council and its members, including my boss, the speaker, can hear from the people on the ground, and that helps um, develop. That helps create um, the ideas for legislation that the council members can put forward. So um, yeah, so it gives people with disabilities the opportunity to, you know, have a connection to the speaker's office and to voice their concerns in terms of improving uh, the quality of life of people like me in the city. So I like it because I don't spend a lot of time behind a desk. I get to interact with people, and I get to work on things that really matter. One of the big issues that we're working on is making the New York City subway system more accessible. Um, so it's great. It's teaching me a lot, and hopefully I'm making a difference.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, what have you been, what are you proud to have accomplished so far in this role? So, you're just talking about, working on a project with the New York City Metro system. Is that completed or is that still in progress?
Oh no, that's gonna be an ongoing process. So we're still working on subway accessibility, and um, I'm trying to think. One of the things that I did early on is I helped to coordinate the city council's participation in this last summer's Disability Pride Parade. It was the first time the city council had a, a contingent in the city council's Pride Parade. So, and like I said, I'm helped to organize a couple of events where we've invited disability organizations to present about what they do to council, to the staff of council members, and just so that council members, in addition to the speaker himself, throughout the city can, you know, become more aware of the organizations that are serving our community and what the needs are and what the concerns are. And um, there's been a lot of success around. There's been money allocated to school accessibility in the recent budget that passed. So a couple of more schools are going to be able to become more accessible. So we've done a lot, but there's there's still a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds like you're doing some great work. So what are your top priorities or goals in this role?
Similar to what I've already described, it's really about helping to make our community more visible and tackling some of the ongoing issues that we've always had, like making daily life a little bit easier for us here in New York City. Like one of the big issues is a lot of it relates to transportation and making, you know, improving structural and architectural accessibility. So a lot of it uh, has to do with that. So like one of the things is like improving uh, improving accessoride and making sure that Uber and the other rideshare companies, um, making sure that those companies serve our communities, and making sure that more schools become accessible. And there are some council members that are taking up the issue of making parks more accessible in their districts. And but a lot of it is also just responding to, on a day-to-day basis, responding to constituent concerns. So I'll come in to the office and the community will reach out to me now that people know that I'm there, and now that people know that there is someone focused on our community. Constituents reach out to me and request meetings, and they present, or they will invite the speaker to an event, and if the speaker is available, he will attend and I will staff him, or if he's not available, I will attend the event on his behalf, and then I write up a little report, and then presented to our team. So I attend events in the community on his behalf as well. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
That's great. It sounds like amazing work. So, speaking of the day to day lives of New Yorkers, how have you improved the day to day lives of New Yorkers with disabilities? Give us specific, vivid examples if possible.
Well, um, I've only been in in the job since April, since the end of April. So um, without revealing, I mean, the other thing I need to be careful of, I don't want to give too much detail because I have to, you know, think about, things that I'm allowed to share and things that I'm not. But I mean, I think the biggest difference so far is something that I've already touched on. Just, I mean, the we're really tackling the accessibility issue and of the subway system, and um, that's really huge. But I think the biggest impact so far, and I only say this because a lot of what we're working on, most of the projects are longer term in terms of improving accessibility. Um, that is going to take a while. But so far, I think the biggest achievement is just having me there and all of the building blocks sort of work that I've been doing since I got there, meaning reaching out to the community and to let them know that I'm and setting up meetings and hearing their concerns and seeing what we can do, what the council can do as a legislative body to some tangible positive differences in light of the concerns that are raised.
That's great. I think it's definitely very important to have somebody being there and hearing the voices and the concerns. So my next question is, in one of the articles written about you online, you were reported to have said, "I'm also working on better access for disabled New Yorkers in homeless shelters." What specific things have you done to make access for disabled New Yorkers in homeless shelters better?
We had a hearing on homeless shelter accessibility in the fall, at the city council, and I was a big part of helping make that happen. An oversight hearing about what um, the city is doing to address the needs of those with disabilities in the homeless shelter system and what needs to be done to improve the way the homeless shelter system accommodates people with disabilities.
That's great. So let's move on to representation of people with disabilities in the media. So you spoke about your support for Hillary Clinton, saying she believes in me, and so I'm quoting here. Quote, she believes in me, and in a country where 56 million Americans with disabilities so often feel invisible, Hillary Clinton sees me. So, how and why do you think Hillary Clinton really sees you or people with disabilities?
So the reason why I said that on that stage is because it's very true. In the what makes it true, in other words, what I mean when I say she sees me, is that um, she always saw and continues to see the value that someone like me can bring to society. She never doubted my potential to be successful and to um, live a productive life. The way that she did that for me, I mean, there are many ways, but the way that she did that for me is by giving me opportunities. So for example, I when I went to a high school that required me to have internship credits, and one of the most difficult things for a lot of people with disabilities is transitioning from educational settings to the workplace and the workforce. And she and her husband, President Clinton, were instrumental, literally, in helping me build my resume. They gave me, internship opportunities. So I started interning for her when I was in high school, and so she started. And then I also have done a lot of work with the Clinton Foundation and with the Clinton Global Initiative. So with her husband, President Clinton, after he left the White House. So both of them have given me opened the doors for me to build a professional resume. They were instrumental in giving me that experience that I was going to need in order to be able to prove to society that I was just as valuable in the workplace as um, someone without a disability. So that's the most concrete way that they have shown that they see me, is that they give me opportunity.
And that's definitely true. One of the greatest ways to see somebody is to give them opportunities and have them, prove themselves to be able to contribute to society. So that's wonderful. So, what are some ways we can make Americans with disabilities feel more seen? How and why are these 56 million individuals with disabilities feel so invisible?
Well, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think it is getting better. I think you see in every industry this is improving a little bit. I think a big part of being seen is having all industries in both the private um, sector and in government work, and no matter what the industry is, I think we just need to bring more people with disabilities to the table. So if we're talking about corporation, like the private sector needs to do more to like hire and recruit people with disabilities. We need to do that in better and more consistent ways in terms of opportunities to to enter politics as well, so that people with disabilities can be taken more seriously as a political constituency to be listened to. And I think the media has a big responsibility when it comes to, increasing representation and making people with disabilities more seen. And I think we see that changing with, with television shows like Speechless um, and TED Talks by people like Maysoon Zaid, and I think so. I think the media is a big part of it. I think um, another industry that comes to mind that I think is, you know, has the ability to impact this specific um, subject is, the world of fashion. Anything in entertainment that's I'm, working in my personal advocacy platform to encourage, news media outlets, television news media to reach out to experts in the field of disability and to have them on the nightly news when they ask panel of experts to come talk about, this issue and that issue in current events, when they address disability and when they don't address disability. They need the news media and journalism needs to do more to incorporate the voices and the expertise and the experiences of people with disabilities.
No, I definitely agree with you there. So, as we mentioned earlier, Disabilities inclusion was the focus of the Broadway musical Addy and Uno. You were the co-producer of that show. The puppets in this musical all have a disability. Uno is autistic, Addy has ADHD, and RJ has cerebral palsy. I hear that it was even nominated for an Off-Broadway Alliance Award. In your opinion, what progress did the show make in terms of making individuals with disabilities feel more seen?
I mean, the best example of the show is we had to close the show for a while just because we had to raise raise money to keep the doors open, but the show is back on again at Theater Row here in New York City. I went to the show last week, and but the best specific example I can give to answer that question directly is one of the first times I saw the show when my friend Tom Dengor and I became a part of this project and bringing it to Theater Row. Um, was when I got to sit behind. So the first time I saw the show that wasn't a rehearsal, I was in the theater sitting behind a little boy with cerebral palsy who has a very similar level of disability to my twin sister in that he's nonverbal, and it became clear that he was there with his family. And there's this number in the show where RJ RJ is the character with cerebral palsy, where RJ has this solo number where he sings this song called "Watch Me Fly," and when this number was happening, I just happened to be looking at this little boy in front of me because I let him sit up front in the closer row so he could see the stage unobstructed. And even though he had limited movement and all those things, because I'm so familiar with his level of disability, because I grew up with my twin, he was just literally trying so hard to jump up and down in his wheelchair and making all these little movements, and he had the biggest smile on his face, and he was doing everything possible to show his little body would allow him to do, to show his excitement about this character and this song. And that really was the the visual representation of what we're trying to achieve, which is to just show little kids, and I would almost argue more so the adults that surround the little kids, that to show that little boy that exactly what the message of that song says, which is like, just because I'm in a wheelchair doesn't mean that I can't fly and set really high goals for myself, have dreams. Like, every kid should be allowed to dream big. And when I saw this little boy reacting to this number in the show, my immediate thought was, this is why we're doing that, because for the first time this family had something to do that they could all do together. Like, he was there with his mom and his dad, and his little sister was not disabled, and they came up to us after the show and they said, thank you for giving us something that we could do as a family together, and without having to struggle or having to worry about whether we would be accepted or welcomed. Or a lot of families with disabilities struggle with the thought of bringing their children to public outings and shows and things like that, because they're worried about disrupting, about being, I would say that they're worried about being disrupting. And so it was through his reaction, just seeing him react to somebody on stage that looked like him. I didn't have that when I was a kid. And we're helping the parents in terms of, you know, reminding them of the same message. Believe it or not, parents of children with disabilities need to be reminded of that same thing, that they should dream big for their children and not um, dumb down the expectations they have for their children just because they have a disability. So I think the show achieves all that. That little boy gets to see someone that looks like him on that stage. And I'm 35, and when I was young, I didn't have that. So I think that's pretty powerful.
That is very powerful and such a good example, too. With that example, how can we empower? So, with that example, how can we move the needle even further in empowering more people with disabilities to want to be in film, in theater, and in the rest of the performing arts arena?
I think one of the ways you do it is give it all connects. Like writer find writers with there are so many writers. We just need to tell stories, tell more. People with disabilities have to be given the opportunity to tell stories, write stories, and as more of our stories get told, more of it will end up on stages at theaters and in movies. And when these things happen, people with disabilities need the opportunity to audition, because what I wanted for that little boy was for him to not only on that stage, but the other piece of it is for him to realize when he gets older that if he wants to be an actor, if he wants to be, on the other side, and if he wants to actually be on the stage, be the person that's telling a story on a theatrical stage, he should feel like he has that opportunity. And I think in terms of moving the needle, the biggest thing that we have to do when it comes to moving the needle, no matter what topic we're talking about, is changing perception, like and breaking down the barriers and the misconceptions that people have about the lives that people with disabilities lead. People, it sounds really simple, but it's just about making people understand that my life isn't altogether that different from yours. And so the best way we can move the needle is to teach as many people as possible. Like when I talk about it from the perspective of parents, like I'm very grateful for my parents, because I think the reason why I became the person that I am is because my parents always had the same expectation of me as they did for my non-disabled siblings, and I think so all of those things, if parents raise their children with disabilities with the same kind of expectation that they would have for their children who don't have disabilities, then you're going to raise ambitious people, and those ambitious people with disabilities are going to want to do all these great things. And but that's really, no matter what we're talking about, changing perception and creating pathways toward those opportunities. Once you educate people and make them understand what's missing and what needs to be improved, most people receive that message well, and most people want to make those changes.
Yeah, that was very powerful, to have the same expectations and to dream big and have lofty goals. Um, Whether that be for parents or for the individuals with disabilities. I think. So that was our last question. Was there anything in closing that you wanted to say? A life motto, last words of wisdom?
One of my life mottos is to live live boldly with a courageous heart. I use those words in the context in my DNC speech. I think the context of it, what I was thanking Hillary for teaching me to do that, and I really tried to live that. I don't succeed at it every day. In fact, there are times in my life where I feel like I rarely succeed at it. But I would say to live boldly with a courageous heart, and what that means to me, or the way that I live that is to try to um, uh, push myself to constantly push the envelope to do things that I don't think are possible, so that once I succeed at doing those things, they then have become more possible for the next person to come and do better than I did. So in order to improve, in order to achieve all the things we've talked about on this podcast, the only way to do that is to like push the envelope further. I've had people say to me when I give public, why would you go to a place like China, or why would you support this business or support that cause if they're so clearly not accessible and so clearly not catering to our community? Why would you associate yourself? And when people ask that kind of a question, my response is, well, first of all, I want to live my life. I'm not going. It is unrealistic to think that the whole world is magically gonna become accessible just because I'm on this earth. So I want to have. I want to live my life, and I can't wait till everything is appropriately accessible for me in order to live my life.
Exactly, exactly. Very well said. Thank you so much, Anastasia, for spending, so much time giving us great examples and explaining to us all the important work that you do. So, with that, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, thank you for having me. It was fun.